Well, I think we have
Really
a
is she?
fairly short critical mass. I think it's super souls here to start.
Oh, she can't have cheese. Pass it down.
I can have
I'm
cheese.
kidding.
They fed me cheesecake in the hospital.
That's not cheese.
No, what's cheese?
Cheesecake?
Well, then give
Sure,
us some
Cream
cheese.
cheese.
Yeah, but it's not as bad.
No, there's no cheese in cheese.
Okay, everybody, if we can just begin. Hi, everybody, if we can just begin. And we'll just do this as cheese is passed around down there. We're just going to start a little bit differently. First of all, I'd like to introduce everyone to Reverend Richard Slater. Our guest Richard, Mary, get up and try to find our name tags. They're either missing or lost or In your houses. in our houses or somewhere. So if everyone would just go around and say your name, and it's not a test. But maybe you could say your name every time you spoke tonight. That would be very helpful. And after everyone has said their name for Richard's sake, Mary then would you lead us in a prayer, and we have a quorum, and we're called to order. Titia, why don't you start with your name? I'll start. Margie Gallivan. Titia Lovia.
I was going to write down all your names, but I'm stuck right there.
You just write Sage.
Sage.
Honorary Sage.
Julie Kessler,
Dave Schweitzer.
Jenny Schweitzer,
Max Gary.
Annie Garen,
Charles Russell.
Evie Sherman. Joe Zerbick.
Linda Messer,
Carol Jeffrey.
Connie Littlefield, Janice Grable.
and Jan Stanley.
Thank you.
And I'm Richard.
And that's Alan.
Well, he's not here, so let's see.
Well, let us pray, shall we?
No.
O God of grace, whose love encircles us all, we come before you in this circle of prayer and friendship, and we lift before you our beloved church and all the church. And we pray that all that we share here and do here and learn here will be in the service of a healthy and vibrant and vital church, and that your blessings will ever ripple through and around this beloved church, and that it will always thrive in your tender care. We pray that our activity today will greatly please your hugely magnanimous and loving heart. Thanks be to God for Richard's ministry among us, and help us to exercise great wisdom in this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Where am I supposed to sign? Where do I sign?
Right here.
No.
Yeah.
I can start.
Oh, good.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to be with you. Those with really sharp memories will recall that I've visited you before. And, on a Sunday morning, and perhaps at other times.
Twice? I think the 5th anniversary of my serving here. So that would have been about almost 7 years ago.
Yeah.
You were here for that.
And then I was here right after you were injured.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's also nice to know that I've been among some of you anyways, in other places. Went with Max to Baltimore, was it where we went?
Yep, General Synod, last one.
And we're part of General Synod, and Connie I've known in a number of different places, including General Synod. Many years ago. Margie has sat on the conference council at some point, or whatever it was called. Yeah. So I sat with her on there. So it's nice. It's nice to be among you again. And my task is really defined by a singular event. and that is the mailing of a letter with consequences for all who received it, from your beloved pastor saying that her time of ministry among you was going to come to an end. And an important part of my work in the New Hampshire Conference is walking with congregations through their time of transition. There's a set of guidelines. There are ways in which the New Hampshire Conference and the national setting of the United Church of Christ support you during your time of transition. There is a path that, should you choose, can be followed, and which will eventually have a positive outcome. And there's something like one of the analogies actually that's been done about this time of transition is you're like a boat setting sail. You leave behind the familiar. You're going across a lake of which can turn into that which is unknown, and you're hoping to reach a distant shore. And you're pretty comfortable where you came from, and you expect to be comfortable where you're going for, but this time of transition has its uneasiness and its anxiety. So perhaps it's helpful to know that there is a charted course. Perhaps you want to chart your own course. I hope if you do, you'll just be in conversation with us so that we can help you avoid the shoals along the way. That's quite a good metaphor.
You're rolling out.
So, one of the things I'm going to leave with you is a document called Guidelines for the Departing Pastor and the Governing Board. The title is A Pilgrimage Through Transitions and New Beginnings. So I'll leave this for both of you, and I want to touch on a couple of different things, and I might as well start with the one that sometimes can be seen as most challenging for the pastor and for the congregation, and it's called pastoral ethics, or the ethics of departure. And there's a good principle that undergirds these ethics. And this principle is that it's built upon the idea that entering into a pastoral relationship with a congregation is a privilege. And Mary accepted that privilege, and slowly she began to enter into your lives. And you have known her as a pastor in a variety of settings, meetings like this, moments when you were hospitalized, when she sat by your bed and prayed with you, times of deep grief where a beloved one was lost and she helped you to make sense out of that tragedy by her companioning presence in your life. So gently and in her own way, Mary has entered into your lives as a pastor. And what is happening now is that she is slowly withdrawing from your lives. She entered as a pastor, she leaves as a pastor, so that another one can come and fill that vacancy, that place in your lives. Some of you will think of her as primarily a friend, someone that you love being around. But Mary understands, and I hope you will come to understand, that she's a pastor first and a friend second. She became a friend because she was a pastor. And that makes it all the harder when she must withdraw from your lives. And she will help set the guidelines. What I have stated is a general principle. The particulars will be worked out. Mary will share that with you in a variety of ways. And gradually, over the next few months, you're going to be involved in the process of letting her go. And that will finally culminate in a liturgical moment in the close of her last service, when you liturgically release one another. So I think I'll pause there, just to allow you a chance to say what's on your mind, to push back, to ask questions.
What shall we call you?
What,
What
What
would you
shall
like-
we call you,
Richard?
Richard? all right.
Yes. Yes.
Is it too early to ask you,
This is Dan.
what are the top 3 shoals we could crash into? Up front, or is that going to be a surprise?
It's a good question.
It is, it's a very good question.
Things to avoid.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I guess I would say one of the first things to be really careful about is becoming overly pragmatic, which is another way of saying letting your finances rule your decisions. There will be good reasons to make good decisions, but in times of anxiety, sometimes congregations choose to go with a less expensive option that doesn't serve the church well over a period of time.
It's not like buying a car.
Yeah. Yes.
I won't talk there. Very friendly.
Right. Another shoal is to go with an unauthorized and an untrained interim minister. Authorization is a technical term that I use for somebody who has passed through a process of becoming a United Church of Christ minister. Occasionally, an interim minister will come to you from another tradition, a Methodist or a Presbyterian, but hopefully I am the one that will present them to you rather than you presenting them to me. Which will give me a chance
It's good to know.
to vet them and to talk with their supervisors and to make sure that the person has the kind of history as a pastoral leader and the kind of training to serve you well. I guess the third shoal I'll mention is to move too fast. To be anxious about the future and to press ahead too quickly. And as I talk a little bit about interim ministry, I think you'll perhaps get a sense of what I'm talking about. There are some congregations that don't want to lose the momentum. That becomes kind of a driving force in the transition. They've had a good ministry, and they really want to have somebody come in who will just pick up where Mary's left off and carry you forward. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't work well at all. Because, as you would probably affirm, there's no one who will bring the unique set of skills and personality and pastoral style that Mary has. And I think you need to step away and let there be some room to kind of adjust to not being with her before you get ready to look for another. So, I've been doing this 10 years. That's the first time I've been asked that question.
Good question.
Of course,
Good
it's-
answers.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But this is another reason the interim
This
is so
is Jenny.
important. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I just forgot I should have said that. That's why the interim is so important, to help us stay alive and healthy, and as we work to finding that permanent
Yeah.
person.
Are there other thoughts or questions about anything that's been said so far? I'd like to give you lots of room to ask questions.
I'm happy. How long will the interim be here? 1 year?
Doesn't matter. As long as it takes.
It's-
to administer.
It's variable. Let me just do sort of a typical timeline. So, once Mary's ministry among you continues, there will typically be a few weeks of pastoral supply, or pulpit supply, and then an interim minister would be ready to start. And the minister can be ready to start February 1st, but quite often that's not the case. So, and there's a period of a few months when the interim minister kind of gets used to you. The interim minister will want some time to not only get to know your names, but to get to know a little bit about the life of the church, the energy of the church, and the focus of the church. And the interim minister will then typically start a process with you that involves a number of things, including thinking about your history, thinking about your passions, what really motivates and energizes you, thinking about new directions, and so on. So the interim minister starts finding ways to know you, but to know you in particular ways. Somewhere in that 3 to 6 month range, a search committee is typically appointed. And the search committee will get organized. They'll go through some orientation with the conference, and this is relatively new. A trained search and call consultant will be assigned to you. A trained search and call consultant. For a long time, Reverend Gary Schulte, our conference minister, and I did all of the work with churches in transition. But at about the time Gary was leaving our conference, he felt it was important to train some retired clergy, some of our retired ministers, to do some of this work with Congregational. And it had something to do with the fact that the number of churches we were working with had really grown to about 40. And we just needed some help. So a trained search and call consultant will be assigned to you, and that person will lead you through the orientation, will kind of be your guide as you move through a process of preparing materials and so on. So,
It might be helpful just to know this, Evie. Historically, the interim who preceded me was here 2 years. The interim who preceded the previous settled minister was here 3 years.
Oh, yeah.
So there have
As long
been
as it takes,
historically
as long as it
kind of
takes.
longish
Yeah.
interims.
Yeah.
So just a little
Thank you.
history there.
yeah.
And remember to distinguish in your minds what you just talked about with the search and call consultant is the search for the settled minister.
That's true.
And we might want to back up a little and ask about what the process will look like for seeking an interim minister. And in our church, the diaconate is the body that's responsible for taking the reins of that process in conjunction with the conference.
Yeah. Just let me finish. I have this mental timeline unfolding in my
Yeah, sorry.
head, and I just want to finish it up more quickly than I've been doing. After the search committee is appointed, and publishes its materials and its advertises through our website and the national UCC website, Your Opportunity Here for Ministry, it's often 3 to 6 months before a minister is called. So to get now to the answer to your question, it could be anywhere from, let's say, 15 to 24 months. And occasionally it goes even longer. But 15 to 18 months is quite typical. So So that's the process of searching for a settled minister. The process of looking for an interim minister is different, and now I'll focus on that. Typically, unless your bylaws specify otherwise, there is a committee or body within the church that is charged with the responsibility of entering into covenant or contract with an interim minister, be it church council or diaconate. And I'm going to be the person that works with you in securing an interim minister. And I'm going to leave a document which is called a request for interim leadership with Margie. And this document, it's just basically 4 pages of information about the church, some idea of the compensation package, along with brief statements about what you sense to be the particular needs of the church during this interim time. Once that's complete and signed, it's sent to me, and I use this as a document to advertise your position. We do that now online, so we'll actually post this document on our website. And then interim ministers will watch that, and if they feel that they might be interested in serving you, they will submit to you their ministerial profile.
Through you or?
Through our
Through you,
office,
yeah.
yeah.
Would that be somebody from New Hampshire, or would it also be somebody outside of the state of New Hampshire?
It can be anybody within the United Church of Christ. More commonly, it's somebody within a 45-minute to an hour drive of here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julie, well, that actually segues into my question. What kind of pool are we working with in terms of candidates?
Well, how many fish are in the pool? Or
And there are so many vacancies too.
it just had, there's an ebb and flow. There's, if you receive our weekly news, our electronic newsletter, you'll see that the list of ministers retiring is growing longer. And so that's good, that's both bad news and good. It means there's more vacancies.
Do you receive that?
But there's a funny thing that happens to ministers, and of course Mary will be an exception.
Or ministers retiring.
No, I'm
But
talking about.
once ministers stop being
Bulk.
ministers
Do you receive that?
and go home and start being just a spouse,
The retired spouse.
pretty soon there are voices within and without saying, shouldn't you be doing something? Shouldn't, and so we find our recently retired ministers become a really rich pool for interim leadership, because they're
I
still
promise
healthy.
you.
She's not doing
That's
that.
not going to happen. And we'll have many other things to do.
I'm
Not
sure,
that.
I'm sure. So,
Because I want to stay married to that spouse.
well, you see,
It's
clergy,
logical, though.
yeah, clergy folks, your minister accepted, are sometimes a peculiar lot, and they sometimes need to be engaged in ministry and can't quite let it go. So
Richard,
yes,
I'm sorry. When does this process begin? How,
I'll leave this with you.
I know, but when do you want it back? Tomorrow? We're looking for somebody in February, so realistically,
Yeah, November, December, November would be a good
3
month.
months ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's-
thank you.
So, and that will be available next year.
Okay.
Is that a tough time of year to?
There's no harm in getting it in earlier though.
No, there isn't.
Okay.
No, you're a church that has reputation, at least in the association and the conference, of being a lively, energized church. So there'll be a lot of interest in serving you. And we can draw from the main conference as well as the New Hampshire conference.
We're not at the end of the earth.
No.
And I wonder if the sooner it's done, it's a long wait for a potential interim to plan ahead, but it might widen the pool a bit if it's available sooner.
It might. So once you feel you're ready to advertise a position, send it to me and we'll put it online right away.
Okay.
And once people respond and send us their ministerial profiles, we put them in a packet and send them to you. And then it really becomes up to you to contact them, arrange an appointment, to interview them, and make a decision. So, so once I kind of send them, my work ends, unless for any reason they're not satisfactory.
So you're a troubleshooter if there's trouble with the interim? You're a go-to resource?
I can be
If
helpful.
we have difficulty?
Yeah, I'm not the employer, though. And that's an important thing. And every minister's contract has a 60 or 90-day release option. So that if you feel for whatever reason that this minister is not satisfactory, you as that same board that entered into contract has the freedom to end that contract.
If it's not working out?
If it's not working out. And occasionally that happens.
That's a long time, 60 or
60 days, and sometimes you can sweeten the deal and make it happen faster. So, but if it's not working, the minister usually has kind of figured that out as well. So that's interim ministry. Any thoughts or questions about that?
Well, I didn't realize that we hire the interim, and then again, we have to hire the.
Settled.
The search committee does a settle pastor.
Yeah, so.
Diaconate
Right,
does.
Diaconate is responsible for entering into the covenant with the interim. And then a search committee will be called or appointed. Is it appointed by
Well,
leadership council?
we've
And it'll
changed
be
our,
a different group, and the search committee will ideally be, representative of the different demographics, I guess, within the congregation, and they will seek to call, rather than, we don't hire, we call.
Is that in our bylaws, or is that?
I don't know if the portion of the interim is still in the diaconate section, but it makes sense that it would be, and I would recommend that it stay there. I'm not sure, I don't remember. But as far as the search team, I think it would be appropriate to hand that over to calling and discernment. And
Very much
wouldn't
so.
you think so?
Yes, in our new structure, this is the first time we're doing
We're
this with
testing
our
it.
new bylaws and our new structure, so that would make, that's obviously a great, sensible idea, yes, of course.
One of the provisions that you'll see written into the covenant for an interim minister is that the interim minister cannot become your settled minister.
Right.
So don't fall in love with your. We try to train them to be ornery, unlikable, but
It just doesn't
it
work
just doesn't
out.
work out. So,
Oh, dog. You want to,
Would you mind if we,
Yeah,
our dog just came back from the hospital and they're
course.
grabbing, can we just bring him down here and he can just sit?
Only if we can pet
yeah,
him.
I better go get him.
Go get him.
He's going to be traumatic.
He was hit with a porcupine.
Oh.
Crawled into a nest of baby porcupines. Luckily, Mama didn't show up, otherwise.
But you know,
Yeah.
there's like, nothing happened
So
afterwards.
they were nice enough. I said, we have a meeting at 5, we can't be there at 5. Oh, drop him off at church. So here we are.
Oh, that's so
Yes,
sweet.
come back to the meeting.
Wow, that's nice.
Remind me of his name.
Charlie.
Charlie.
Oh, Charles Blake.
Well, add Charles Blake is coming.
All right, does anybody else have a question bubbling up? What's gonna happen? Are we gonna panic? Are we?
No, because we've done this before. I mean, we've never let you go before. This is a hard one. I'm not saying that the others, I mean, they were all wonderful, but as long as I've been in this church, you have been here longer than any of the others. So exactly what you said, they become your friend. Yes, this is the hardest part.
I'm hitting some shoals over
Well,
here.
Yeah.
But I'll get through them.
I think that the first shoal of being overly pragmatic, I think you turned it into perhaps a monetary issue, but, you know, thinking, I think our over pragmatism.
Sounds good.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Pragmatism might come from, we're gonna be all right, we'll be fine.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we're moving along, we're
That's
in this
how we are.
process, and then all of a sudden,
The ship won't
And then
sink,
they're
but
gone.
it'll never sink.
and then it'll really, yeah, so we have to beware. We have to be aware of that too. We have to prepare ourselves,
And-
we have to prepare ourselves
The
well.
lay leadership has always stepped up, and we've done some amazing things in times of interim to kind of fill, well, we've just done some amazing things during an interim period, so we're gonna be okay.
There's a
Because-
funny way in which I'm still only permitted to work about 3/4 time, Richard. And there are many elements of my role that are being backburnered or carried by others at the moment. But that has proven to be true in this time as well. And the lay folk, all of you are amazing ministers in your own
Remember
right.
the open and affirm?
Open and affirming,
Yeah.
we resettled refugees.
That's right.
Yeah.
We embarked on our Zimbabwe partnership during an interim period. Jim Curry was our intern.
Yeah.
So we've done some really significant things, and maybe it's our way of dealing with losing someone that we've loved, that we get involved in something, you know.
Roll up
But
your sleeves and get busy.
yeah, we get busy with
true.
what new thing can we do next, you
Yeah,
know?
right.
and-
What can you expect from an interim minister? You can expect the interim minister to do all of the duties of your settled pastor. It's a real, interim minister is a real minister, and can be expected to do all of those. And in addition, the interim minister will attend to those interim specific tasks that I was talking about earlier, as well as staff the search committee and support the search committee in its work up to the point when the search committee starts receiving ministerial profiles and confidentiality becomes an issue. So the interim minister does everything plus an additional layer of responsibilities related to the transition. Yes.
I'm curious about,
Preaching.
Yes.
Mary is a wonderful preacher, and I'm just curious, with interim ministers, does anybody get an opportunity to see them preach prior to coming here? Is there an idea of having sermons? I mean, like, I know a lot of churches put sermons on Facebook or, you know, stream on Facebook.
The search process is quite streamlined and doesn't usually, a search process for an interim minister, it doesn't usually involve having them come and preach. However, in this day and age, most ministers have materials online, either a podcast or a link to YouTube, or they can send you a video of their own worship leadership style, so you can get a sense. One thing you probably shouldn't plan on doing is going to their church to visit.
No.
There are risks in that. You
How
think,
could they be wanting to be an interim minister and still be a minister in the church, though?
well, one of two things. One is that they could be serving a congregation as a pastor, as a settled pastor, but feeling some kind of call to do something different.
In addition to.
And beyond. They're maybe wanting to do a different kind of ministry. And one of the challenges of being a minister in the United Church of Christ is keeping a secret from your congregation until such time as you accept a call to go to another church or setting for ministry. So if 4 people show up in East Billerica, and they're all from Wakefield, and they're all sitting together.
We're a little suspicious.
So you have to go the other way. And everything that the minister puts online is available for you. It's fair game. So Facebook and Instagram, and YouTube, and all of those you can use to find out more about the person.
And you can certainly ask them to present something
Yes.
as part of the interview process for an interim. And one thing I was wondering on behalf of the diaconate, it might be interesting to ask you, what do you think are some really good questions to ask a potential interim? Some things, you made the point earlier, a very good point about not going with an untrained interim or an unauthorized interim. Maybe a little bit about some of the qualities they might want to be looking for.
I think one thing you'll want to look at are their credentials. Have they undertaken interim ministry training? There's both a basic interim ministry training and there's an advanced interim ministry training that's available through the Interim Ministers Network. And then there are a wide variety of other courses that can be taken to help prepare a person for interim ministry.
Give me some sympathy, please. Better.
They have to like dogs.
Yeah, they have to like dogs.
That's it, right over here, baby, right back here. We'll sit back here. Don't you be a pest now, come
Probably
on.
stole the thunder for a moment.
Yeah.
So anyhow, training.
All over his body, luckily not in his face.
Okay, so we're down to credentials.
To ask about their experience in, sort of, to tell us a little bit about your experience at such and such a church. What were the circumstances? How did you respond to them? You can ask them, what do you feel are your strengths as an interim minister? And what areas challenge you? In addition to that, every interim minister will list a couple of references. And you can call the references and ask them to tell you a little bit about this person's ministry, what you appreciated about that minister's ministry. Were there special moments in that ministry that had particular meaning to you?
Oh, that's a nice question.
Yeah, so the advice is always to ask open-ended questions, rather than those that can be answered simply. Yeah.
So this is still the diaconate doing?
The interim.
Yeah.
Yes, and Julie confirmed that. She looked up the bylaws.
It
So
is
we're,
in there.
it is in there.
Oh, good.
Oh, goody. Yeah, good.
So if we're ready, I would like to turn our attention from interim ministry then to your responsibilities as a local church during the transition time. One thing I would urge you to undertake is an exit interview. Carol Stratford Association, Committee on Church and Ministry, has materials to conduct an exit interview with you. And typically at an exit interview will be a couple of people from the association, the pastor, and a representative sampling of church leaders. Again, the questions are of an open-ended nature. They will ask the minister questions like, what did you experience when you first came, or what did you find when you first came to this church? What were the things asked of you? What were the challenges you encountered in your ministry? What were the joys that you encountered? And then the congregation is asked similar open-ended questions. You know, what drew you to Mary as a pastor, as a pastoral candidate? What was her ministry? Tell us about her ministry. What were the particular joys you experienced in your years together? So these are open-ended questions. It's not a review like you might get it at work. It's not a review.
Where does that go?
And that is shared with the congregation. It's also shared with the Association's Committee on Church and Ministry. It's a time for the Committee on Ministry to learn about the congregation and congregation to kind of reflect on that, the experience.
And the association representatives are usually from the Committee on
They
Church
are.
and Ministry.
One will ask the questions and another will keep the notes. So an exit interview is typically done within the last few weeks of a pastor's ministry. On a cold day in January. The next thing I want to mention has to do with church records. Every pastor keeps in one form or another certain records. Some relate to baptism, funerals, weddings. Some ministers keep notes on some of their hospital visits or their encounters with families. And if this information doesn't violate standards of confidentiality, it should be collected and then presented to the next minister. It's also useful for the minister who comes to know how the church functions. Is this a church that looks to its minister to make every decision? No, I said that. I said, no, it's not the case.
Thank God.
Is this a church that has a really strong laity that is used to creating ideas and following up those ideas? You know, what is the style of ministry? Where does the church expect the minister to be most visible? You know, which committees might the minister's presence be requested? So there are some records that are of a confidential nature, and there are some records that are not so, and the minister will be probably the primary person in getting that stuff together. But if you have a computer in the office, that'll have to be purged and secured for the next person. So.
Typically, now, I really welcomed, when I came, a meeting with the interim for him to share information and say, here's this and here's where I put that. And is that typical that most trained interims would like that kind of meeting with an outgoing pastor?
I think so.
Good.
I think so, yes. Those kind of conversations can be really valuable.
Yeah, in my two experiences at Salisbury and coming in here, in the middle was the hospital, so that was a little different. But, yeah, it was very, very helpful to meet with the interim and have that information.
Excuse me, your question was, should the minister that we're hiring have an interview with the current interim?
No, it's,
Because-
I, as the outgoing pastor, will offer to have a kind of pass the baton meeting.
And
with
is that
the
the
interim.
norm?
And in my experience, it has been. I just wondered if you found that most people, want that to happen.
I think most people do, and then again, when the interim minister prepares to leave and the settled minister comes.
Same thing,
Same
right.
kind of conversation.
Right.
Yeah. And when I came to my position, I sat down with the person who served before, so. Yeah. There are some financial things that need to attend to. The treasurer needs to be aware that at a certain point, paychecks will stop flowing.
Janice is our treasurer, Julie's our assistant treasurer.
The pension boards will need to be noted that it's no longer in your. They're just some things that need to be attended to. The next section is parsonage, so you can skip over that. The other thing I'll mention is I know it's redundant, so I'll be brief. I'll just simply say you want to have some fun and having a farewell that really celebrates your ministry among you. And churches basically know how to do that. Food is often involved.
Yeah, always.
We're good at fun.
We will have fun with it.
Oh, yes, we will.
If you dream of doing a roast, you probably want to check with your minister about that first.
But there's so much to make fun of, it would be a good, great,
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that you as a board will want to be thinking about. I have now pretty much completed my agenda with you. These are the things that I had intended to share with you. I'd like to now just kind of be still for a moment and let you think about what's been said and whether there are other thoughts you have, questions you want to ask about. Yes.
As the diaconate is working, trying to find an interim, is it important for us to keep in communication with the congregation to give them an update as what the progress is and how we're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm grateful I didn't cover that really. Communication is really important, and one of the things you might want to do at some point, probably in the early fall, is have a newsletter article in which you talked about the process that you're undertaking. There actually are some suggested materials in here about what you might want to say in a newsletter article or a bulletin article. And then it wouldn't hurt to follow up with simple reports by saying we met and interviewed a couple of candidates and we'll be reporting to you soon the outcome. Try not to disclose names or villages where they live, but identifying features.
We've always been very open with one another, and that's one of the things I think we've really worked very, very hard on since Mary's been here. She's helped us. The openness, the communication, the honesty, no little, side things going on. Just, if you've got a problem, just bring it out and let's talk about it. And so I would hope this could be the same way, so people don't think that we're the strong board that's making this decision for, it's.
We don't even know which board it is, so.
Ministry.
No, yes, it is.
That's what I say, yeah.
And Joe and Ginny are the diaconate co-coordinators, so they're listening very carefully.
Yes.
We are, I've been writing up the storm.
Well, okay.
No, so far I still have a little room.
It wouldn't hurt to even put something in about how the bylaws direct you to do certain things.
Oh, that's a good idea, so they don't think that we're just, this Patsy committee that are demanding to do this.
What's that I did?
But we can just let the folks, the whole congregation know that this is what the bylaws says.
Oh, yeah.
That this is the job of the diaconate, so they don't
Right.
wonder.
That's a good idea.
Diaconate is taking a responsibility seriously.
Seriously doing so.
Joyously.
I'm thinking back to past searches. And this can be kind of fun. It usually is fun. It's daunting for some. But we have to come up with a description of who we are. Here we go again. Who are we? And what kind of minister do we want? And I suppose that's in a packet somewhere. That reminds us to do all
the
this.
search?
The search,
Yes.
the search for the settled minister. Because I kind of see everything happening kind of at the same time. We've got the form for interim leadership. But when when do we start everything?
I have the same question.
When do we start everything? And I suppose it's just it's a question of getting together, and making a list of all the things that need to be done, and then putting them in a logical place and time frame for us. Yeah?
So the questions for an interim minister are a little different than the questions for the church's search profile, although they're related, as I think you'll see. The local church profile now is a new profile. The old ones have passed away and the new one has come. And it's built around 3 questions that you answer in brief essays rather than with lots of facts and figures.
And it's done online, yes.
It can be done online, yes. So the 3 questions are, 1, who are we? And that's not just about Dick and Jane and Mary. It's really a question about history, ministry, mission. Second question is, who is our neighbor?
Who is our neighbor?
Keats.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's where the committees often start. The town hall, the fire department,
And Paul Nickerson has gotten
Oh,
us
yes,
working with
good.
that for a long time. And that's one of the who we are pieces that is wonderful. It's a very outreaching, that whole vitality piece is a big thing to
We
remember.
have a lot of neighbors.
Yes.
And then the third question is, who is God calling us to become?
Those are such beautiful
Yeah.
questions.
Wonderful questions. So,
Richard, would you
yes.
explain who is our neighbor a little bit more?
This is Chuck.
Chuck, I'm sorry, Chuck.
So as you might expect, it has a biblical context. You go back to the time when Jesus was asked that question, and who is my neighbor? He told the parable of the Good Samaritan. The outcome of which was, in that particular case, whoever is in need is my neighbor. So the neighbor is used not so much literally as a metaphor for those in this community or in this world who are your neighbors.
In other words, who we are to serve as a organized church. That's very interesting.
So your neighbor can be, as Connie has discovered, an orphanage in Mount Celinda.
Yes, thank you.
I like that second.
Are there any other questions? Because I think it's almost time, it is time to call us to a close. Richard has a commute. Are there any other questions? Because you're going to be available to us.
I am.
We know your number.
That's good. We got your number.
So, thank you, Richard, for coming
Yes,
tonight.
thank you so
Let's
much.
get it started.
Good to be with you.
Very clear.
Marty, can we close with a prayer?
We can't.
Do you have a question first?
I just have one question, Ginny. You were wondering where we should start. Does it seem like we should start with November 1st when you send in that application? Is that kind of how we're going to go, or would we start much sooner than that ourselves?
You can start as soon as it feels right to you. So it could be mid-September, it could be October.
But the goal too is when we send that application into you with all of our information, that's when you're going to start doing a little of your own research for us as far as putting our name out there.
Yeah, and it's really putting your ministry opportunity, letting the world know that there's an opportunity to serve this church as. So it's an online process.
And I think that we've started today, in a way, you know.
We have,
have to.
we have.
I'm gonna ask what for further refinement, because I thought everything kind of started right away. You know, we put together a timeline, we put together our duties, you know, we just have a little whiteboard that we check off. But now I'm thinking, do we not even start looking for a settled pastor until Mary's gone? Is that when we start talking among ourselves who we are, who is our neighbor, without Mary here? Is that when that happens?
And typically, it doesn't really begin until this interim minister's been here for a couple of months.
Okay,
Kind of
okay.
gotten established.
Okay. Good questions, everybody. Is there anything else?
Let me just mention that my own schedule this summer has me taking a vacation starting around the 22nd of July, going through August 6th or 7th. I'm glad. I'm worried.
You don't want to hear from us in that period?
I just want you to know I won't be very responsive.
Not be responsible. Good for you.
As well.
Well, thank you.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
Wonderful
so
to
much.
be with you.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you for your
Feels a little more real. Chuck, you did call us to prayer. Is there something that
yes.
you would like to offer, or would you like, how would you like to do this? Would you like to
I
hear
have
from our
no-
ministers?
I have no particular choice. I'd be glad to do it if that's what you want.
Oh, yes.
I would love that.
Yeah, I would love that too. Thank you.
Lord Jesus, thank you for bringing us all together and for creating the interest in us, because our interest, along with our expertise, is going to more readily ensure a successful outcome. Because the successful outcome has ramifications for many years to come, and as such will impact many people, those of us here, those of us who are with the church, and those of us in the community, as broad as it may be. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I could see everybody.
And I'm sorry about not knowing your name.
So where's your doggy doing? Is he outside?
Is he outside and they better take him in the other room?
Oh.
It's a nice name.
Tuckerman has
I
gotten
see you
it
here, of
twice.
course, I know that.
But those are the mature
You have a high level disability, very involved, which is good.
Okay, I'll come out.
I think he was lucky that it was a baby's nest, because they're long, and they're very quiet, whereas the adult
I'm
for
shocked.
and every dog, usually the adult, their parts go to the face. They don't have any in the face, but those little critters, they don't shoot out.
No, they don't shoot.
Well, whatever they did,
He rubbed up against it.
they're all over his
Because
eyes.
they're barked on the end, so the minute he rubbed up against it, stuck into his skin. There's that old wives' tale that said they shoot, they don't shoot. They do not shoot.
He must have,
There's
you know what I
barbs.
think, he must have rolled in their nest.
He must have rolled in the nest.
Oh, that is
But you will get
my dog.
Was that Benita? In the mountains, Tuckerman. This is the very last time it goes.
Yeah, because they're, the adult ones are.
Richard, it was nice. Thanks.
So how are you? Nice to see you all. Hi. Nice to see you. So what is happening?
Oh, yeah, sorry. There's all the faces.
I think that I was born.
Donna put me on that.
We all pretty much understand the process.
Sure.
I can respond because I.
We've been through a couple of.
Other than that, I think the residents, many of us feel confident in the process.
Then there's Gonic, and then there's the total.
I like the idea that we third act, the congregation, the best.
I'll tell you why, keep them updated. We know
It's
what happens
so hard to bring this up.
Oh, you mean,
And we've done a good job working on it. If you want to keep this, put that in your file, you can work on that together.
Yes.
And he said that, I thought he said November, October, November, but depending on when you want.
Just so you know,
Let's not do it this summer.
Okay, do it in the fall, early fall.
I think so.
So I'm gonna put this in my folder for diaconate, is that what you want me to do?
I think you and I can sit down and fill that out.
We need to
Yeah, but I think in September, October will be fine, and then he can post it, we'll still have months to get somebody lined up.
Yes.
And then that way we can get some of it done maybe before Christmas.
We're gonna also have to figure the budget part out, because that's the trickiest thing. Because was very interested in that.
Gives us advice on that.
Well,
And it would not, I mean, it would not be disability, that's what you said. Yeah. Which is, right outside our house.
oh, we're gonna find that out. We would know that.
No, one acre, but the way I understand it, the lawn, I think you put back.
I can get you some of this information.
It's more than two.
And when you go into the interview, it is
More than two.
Right, but we don't know who's gonna get this or see it, so this is ours going out, correct? That's what this is.
Yeah, this is
We're
what.
putting very big, so I actually don't have any questions in here.
Oh, number of members, 5 years, got it. I'm talking about money, and you're talking about.
There's an interview where
Yeah,
it was
that's
filed
right.
to use
So on the
the
14th.
Know about
they've
that.
done it.
We didn't do it.
So there, he gets all
As long
that.
as you are going to get
Yeah.
10 years ago here, I will be able to get not in this
Yeah. Oh.
So I'm hoping if they did the reporting like they should have, I could get it.
That's some, oh, that's true. If, that's the word, if. Number 10. This is interesting.
Because I know like my neighbor.
We can average it.
Be good.
Because we keep track of it anyway.
Participating.
My,
There's Bible study, that's
Yeah.
right. We could come up with something.
one of my neighbors wanted to see if our.
Put it all together. That would be something. Okay.
I don't want to, no.
All right.
We'll see about it. People are right in front of us. I have been I just wanted so I don't leave here telling, I want to tell that I want that back. And it's
I know you are, but there was a moment there.
I'm obsessed with this house.
There are others I know, I've heard, and
I make Richard go in.
Oh, yeah. You'll get that hash out there.
That's gonna come up. And that's gonna come up.
And I agree.
Doesn't matter. You still have to have, they're gonna be here full time. Part-time minister. They credentials. This could be a young person that comes in.
Based on experience.
Experience over there.
Don't put experience. Well, it's a suggestion, but I talked over the word.
I got to ask. Richard, could I ask you one question, please? On the line that says the money.
In every one, you have to find the one that has the most points, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The amount of money.
Yeah, that works in your price range.
I don't think we pay somebody every now to spend here for 12
It's
years.
listed. My brother says listed.
What is your criteria?
Well, okay, well, let me contact my brother.
Go to Zillow, I go to Zillow.
But he said he just
Are you
listed it with
familiar
a
with
real.
our compensation
Oh, we did, so
guidelines?
that's where we have to go then.
So,
Where is it?
Go to that.
so we have both the guidelines and a
I know
calculator.
where we're, yeah.
Calculator is basically a spreadsheet.
Road, yeah.
Beyond
You
Dawn.
go there.
Beyond Dawn.
Yes,
That'll give
yes,
you
yes.
a
And Praise Hill is actually.
I know where Prairie Hill is.
Yes.
I know all about that.
long housing allowance if you.
And whose house is it?
And
Well,
then,
my brother works with this guy. They both, I think they both
in
live
addition to
Wyndham.
cash
I'm not
salary,
sure where they're
typically there'll be
located.
some
And so every Monday
benefits.
they go to Wyndham.
And one thing to
That's
keep-
negotiable.
So they were
Yes.
talking and this guy
One thing
said,
to
oh.
remember is that our ministers, depending on their
And
particular
so then
station
he
of life,
texted me and he said, he's
also
putting a house
have
for sale
needs
and
for health
21
insurance.
Wow, that's awesome.
Single person.
No.
So the basic thing.
It's your ballpark. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Joe gets distracted.
Well, no, I do. I didn't know I had to talk.
I just asked him.
I have to give her a hug.
No, I'm not going in.
The poor guy has to go to the bathroom.
Oh, okay.
He was on his way.
We'll tell the world.
Really well. Yes, what was the question?
He said to go to the compensation guidelines.
No,
we have.
Yeah.
Let me-
Which we do
Good,
have.
should we do
That
that?
will actually give us a real good
There's
idea
a
about
calculator on our website that's.
Ariel knows how to do it. She's so good at it. And we also have some, yeah, we can do that.
Here it is.
And the variables, you said it would depend upon single
Their
family